It started on my birthday. I wasn't expecting much. A quiet dinner with Jessica, maybe a bottle of wine, and some lazy movie night afterward. We weren't exactly in the honeymoon phase anymore, but things had been stable, or so I thought. I walked through the door that evening, arms loaded with takeout from our favorite place. I was trying to make the night special. Picked her favorite wine, even got the spicy tuna rolls she loved, but rarely let herself indulge in. The house was eerily quiet when I came in, which struck me as odd. She always had music playing or the TV on, even when she was just doing something mundane like folding laundry. I remember calling out, "Jess, you home?" expecting her to appear with some sarcastic comment about me being late again. Nothing. I headed upstairs, thinking maybe she was getting ready. The door to our bedroom was cracked open. I was about to push it open when I heard a sound that froze me mid-step. Laughter. A laugh that was sharp, almost unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else. A Jessica I didn't know. My heart rate shot up, my palms instantly sweaty. Instinct told me something wasn't right, but curiosity pushed me forward. I nudged the door wider and my world tilted. There she was, lounging on the bed in the robe I'd bought her for our anniversary. Her phone propped up on a pillow, FaceTiming some guy. Her robe was barely holding on, like it was more for decoration than function. The scene felt surreal, like I'd stumbled into someone else's life. She hadn't noticed me yet. The guy's voice came through the phone. "I'll see you this weekend, babe. We can pick up where we left off last time." Yeah, my stomach lurched. Weekend? Left off? Last time? She smiled. A real smile, the kind she hadn't given me in ages. "Of course. I've been thinking about you all day." Her voice had that sickly sweet tone she used to save for me when we first started dating, before everything got so mechanical. I didn't even realize I was standing there like a statue until her eyes flicked up to mine. The color drained from her face in a second. She fumbled to grab the phone, but it was too late. I had already seen everything. "Josh, it's not what it looks like," she started, her voice trembling, but the panic in her eyes betrayed her. I could see the gears spinning, already trying to come up with some ridiculous excuse. The fact that she even tried to spin this was insulting. "Who the hell is that?" I asked, my voice low, though I wasn't even sure if I wanted to hear the answer. Her lips parted like she was going to answer, but nothing came out. Just silence. And that was louder than any explanation she could have given me. There was no explosive confrontation, no screaming or throwing things. I stood there, staring at her, trying to make sense of the pieces of the life I thought we had. She, on the other hand, was frozen, still gripping the phone like it was some lifeline to her secret world. I turned around, walked out, and shut the door behind me without another word. And that's when the real storm began. I left the house that night, my mind spinning, my body moving on autopilot. I don't even remember grabbing my car keys or how long I drove, but somehow I ended up at my buddy Ryan's place. The second he opened the door, I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost because his face went serious immediately. "What happened?" he asked, pulling me inside before I could even get a word out. I sat down on his couch, still gripping the steering wheel in my mind, replaying the scene of Jessica sprawled out on our bed, talking to some guy like I didn't even exist. I told Ryan everything. The FaceTime call, the robe, the way her face changed when she saw me standing there. I could barely get the words out without my voice cracking from the weight of it. He sat across from me, silent, absorbing everything. When I finally finished, he leaned forward, his face a mixture of shock and anger. "So what are you gonna do? You confronted her, right?" "No," I muttered. "I just walked out." He blinked, like he didn't hear me right. "You just left. What was I supposed to do, Ryan? Start yelling? Throw stuff?" Felt like a nightmare. I don't even know who she is anymore. Ryan didn't answer right away. He rubbed his face, clearly trying to figure out what to say. But there was nothing that would fix this. Nothing could take away the image of her calling someone else babe while sitting in the same bed we'd shared for years. The next few days were a blur. I avoided going home as much as possible, crashing on Ryan's couch and coming up with excuses for why I needed to stay late at work. But eventually I had to go back. The house felt like a stranger's place now. Cold, quiet. I half expected Jessica to try and smooth things over, maybe some lame attempt at an apology. But when I opened the door, the first thing I saw was a note on the counter. "Josh, we need to talk. I'm not going to let you ignore me forever." I stared at the note, feeling my blood boil. "Talk?" She acted like I was the one avoiding her after what she'd done. I crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash. We didn't need to talk. There was nothing she could say to make this better. Except that wasn't true. I did want answers. That evening, I finally confronted her. She came home like nothing had happened, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, her hair perfect as usual, and that fake smile plastered on her face. It made my skin crawl. "So," I began, standing in the kitchen as she casually poured herself a glass of water. "Who was that guy?" She paused, her hand frozen mid-pour. Slowly, she set the glass down and turned to face me. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice controlled, like she'd practiced this in her head 100 times. "He's just a friend." I let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh even to my own ears. "A friend? That's what you call it now? You were practically undressing for him over FaceTime." Her face tightened, lips pressed into a thin line. "Josh, you don't understand." "No, Jess," I interrupted, my patience running thin. "I understand perfectly. You're lying to me, and you have been for God knows how long." She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "Don't try to twist this. You haven't exactly been the perfect husband either." My jaw clenched. "Are you seriously trying to blame me for this right now?" Her voice got louder, sharp, like she wanted to cut me with it. "You haven't been around. You're always at work or with your stupid friends. What did you expect?" I was lonely. I stood there, stunned for a second, trying to wrap my head around the audacity of it all. She was spinning it, twisting the blame onto me, acting like her choices were somehow my fault. I felt a rush of heat, anger bubbling up from deep inside. "So that's it?" I asked, my voice low, barely keeping control. "You cheat on me because you were lonely? What, you couldn't talk to me? You had to run to some random guy?" She scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. "Don't act like you're some saint, Josh. You barely notice me anymore." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was talking in circles, deflecting, refusing to take any responsibility. Every word out of her mouth made me feel like I was losing my grip on reality. The worst part? She said it all with zero remorse. That's when I realized I wasn't talking to my wife anymore. Whoever this woman was, she wasn't Jessica, at least not the Jessica I thought I knew. And in that moment, as I stared into her cold eyes, I knew this wasn't something I could fix. Not now. Maybe not ever. But the storm wasn't over yet. I thought the confrontation would bring clarity, that maybe hearing her twisted version of events would help me decide what to do next. But if anything, it made things worse. The more I replayed her words in my head, the angrier I got. She hadn't just cheated. She'd rewritten our whole relationship in her mind, made me the villain in a story where she got to play the victim. It was beyond insulting. A few days after that ugly conversation, I decided I needed to clear my head. Sitting in that house, with all the memories stitched into every corner, was suffocating me. I went for a run, hoping that pounding the pavement might burn off some of the rage that had settled deep in my bones. When I got back, drenched in sweat, there she was, sitting at the kitchen table, her phone in hand, typing away like she had all the time in the world. I could feel the tension in the air as soon as I stepped inside. I'd barely gotten one foot through the door when she spoke, not even looking up from her phone. "We need to talk about this," she said, her voice flat, like she was bored already. I yanked my earbuds out, my heart still racing from the run, but the anger in my chest didn't ease up. I tossed my keys onto the counter and stared at her, waiting for her to say something that made any kind of sense. "You can't keep ignoring me," she continued, still focused on her screen. "We're both adults. We should deal with this like adults." Couldn't help but laugh at that. "Adults?" I repeated, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. "You're talking about being an adult now, after everything?" She sighed, finally looking up, her eyes narrowing as she leaned back in the chair. "Josh, this isn't the end of the world, okay? People make mistakes. You're blowing this way out of proportion." I felt something snap inside me. "A mistake? That's what you're calling it now? You've been seeing some other guy behind my back. lying to my face, and now you're acting like I'm the one who's overreacting. Her eyes rolled so hard I thought they'd get stuck. It's not like I slept with him or something. Really? I asked, crossing my arms, feeling my muscles tense. How stupid do you think I am? Jessica stood up, her chair scraping against the floor, and walked over to the sink to pour herself a glass of water like we weren't in the middle of discussing the complete destruction of our marriage. The casualness of it all made me feel like I was losing my mind. I don't know what you want from me, Josh, she said, taking a sip. I already told you it was a mistake. I was lonely. You weren't around. I needed someone to talk to. Talk to? You mean undress for on FaceTime? My voice was shaking now, the bitterness bubbling over. God, you're so dramatic, she snapped, finally turning to face me fully. If you're so miserable, then maybe we shouldn't even be doing this anymore. For a moment, I just stared at her. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the woman I thought I'd married. This wasn't some fight we were going to patch up. This wasn't something we'd laugh about years from now. This was the ugly, raw truth staring me in the face. She didn't give a damn about what she'd done. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even pretending to be. What do you mean, doing this? I asked quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw something flicker there, something cold, calculating. She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. Maybe we should just end it, Josh. You clearly don't trust me, and I'm tired of having to defend myself over something that was, honestly, your fault to begin with. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My fault, I repeated, disbelief coursing through me. Her lips curled into a slight smirk, as if she just figured out how to win this twisted game. Yeah, you've been emotionally checked out for months. You think I didn't notice? All those late nights, all those hours spent with your friends or working. You left me alone in this marriage. You did this. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She had just flipped the entire narrative, putting the blame squarely on me for her betrayal. I stood there, my heart pounding, struggling to find the right words, but none came. All I could think about was how utterly detached she seemed, like this wasn't our life she was talking about, but some minor inconvenience she was finally tired of dealing with. Wow, I whispered, shaking my head. You really don't care, do you? She didn't flinch. Look, Josh, maybe it's time we both admit this isn't working anymore. Maybe we're not meant to be together. The words hung in the air between us like a fog. Part of me knew she was right. This wasn't working. We weren't meant to be together. Not like this. But hearing her say it so casually, like she was talking about canceling a gym membership, made my skin crawl. I didn't respond. I didn't have the energy. Instead, I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair and headed for the door. Where are you going? She asked, her voice sharp. I turned back, just for a second, to clear my head. Try not to invite your friend over while I'm gone. And with that, I slammed the door behind me. When I left the house that night, I wasn't sure where I was going. All I knew was that I needed to get away from her, from the toxic energy in that house. Every word Jessica said was still buzzing in my head, looping over and over. This isn't working. Maybe we're not meant to be together. I found myself driving aimlessly, the cold night air whipping through the window I'd left cracked open. I ended up at some random bar on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where no one asks questions, and you can sit quietly with your thoughts drowning in cheap whiskey. I sat down, ordered a drink, and just stared at the glass. The amber liquid swirled slowly as I turned the glass in my hand, but I couldn't bring myself to take a sip. I was thinking about the last time Jessica and I had been truly happy. When had things gone so wrong? Had I really been so blind, so checked out like she said? But no matter how hard I tried to dissect it, one thing was clear. She'd made a choice. This wasn't just some slip-up. She was done with us. I could see it in the way she spoke to me, the cold detachment in her eyes. There was no remorse, no sign that she even wanted to fix things. She was already halfway out the door, and I was just the idiot standing in the way. I took a sip, the burn of the alcohol doing little to calm the fire in my chest. As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I hesitated before pulling it out, fully expecting it to be Jessica with another attempt to twist the knife deeper. But when I saw the name on the screen, my heart stopped for a moment. It was an email. From Jessica. Confused, I opened it, my mind racing through 1,000 possibilities. Was this her way of apologizing? A message she couldn't bring herself to say in person? But what I read was something far more shocking. The subject line read, "I should have told you the truth a year ago." My hands tightened around the phone as I read the opening line. "Josh, I know you hate me right now, and you have every right to. But before we move on, I need to tell you something I've been hiding for the past year." I blinked, trying to make sense of it. A year? What the hell was she talking about? She kept going, spilling out everything like a confession that had been boiling beneath the surface for months. "Remember that business trip to Chicago last year? It wasn't a business trip. I met him then. We've been seeing each other since. I never wanted it to get this far, but here we are. I thought if I kept it hidden, it wouldn't hurt you. But I was wrong. I'm sorry." The words hit me like a freight train. The breath left my lungs, and I stared at the screen, my vision going blurry around the edges. This wasn't just a recent thing. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This had been happening for a year. A whole damn year of lies. Sneaking around, living a double life while I had no idea. I'd been a fool. The shock gave way to rage. My mind was racing, trying to comprehend how someone could be so heartless. All the times she'd smiled at me, kissed me, shared a bed with me, knowing she had someone else waiting for her in the shadows. And then it hit me, hard. All those business trips, the sudden weekends away, the unexplained late nights. It had all been part of the same lie, this elaborate game she'd been playing while I'd been too blind, too trusting to see it. I wanted to smash something, scream, do anything to release the fury building inside me. But instead, I just sat there, numb. I couldn't even find the strength to move. The bar around me faded into the background, the noise of laughter and clinking glasses feeling like it was coming from another world entirely. I was living in a nightmare, and the worst part was, I didn't know how to wake up. I read the email over and over again, each time feeling a fresh wave of anger and betrayal wash over me. It felt like a sick joke, a confession dumped in my lap when she knew I couldn't run from it. The kind of bombshell that didn't just end a marriage, but destroyed everything you thought you knew about the person you'd built a life with. The bartender must have noticed the look on my face because he came over, cautiously asking, "You all right, man?" I blinked, realizing I was gripping the edge of the bar so tightly my knuckles were white. "Yeah," I muttered, barely recognizing my own voice. Just had a long day." That was an understatement. The truth was, my world had just shattered, and I had no idea how to put the pieces back together. As I sat there in the dim light of the bar, I realized this was it. The breaking point. There was no fixing this. No talking it out. No going back. Jessica had made her choices long before I ever caught her on that FaceTime call. And now I was the one left to pick up the wreckage. But one thing was certain. I couldn't stay in this marriage. Not after this. Not after knowing she had been lying to me for an entire year. I downed the rest of my drink, feeling the alcohol burn its way down my throat, and stood up to leave. As I walked out of the bar and into the cold night, I knew what I had to do. This was the end. The email from my cheating wife a year after our breakup changed everything, but before I even got to that point, I had to face the cold reality. I couldn't stay with her. There was no part of me left that wanted to try. The marriage was already dead. She'd killed it long before I even realized what was happening. After leaving the bar, I drove around for hours, the city lights blurring into one endless stream as my mind replayed her email like some sick highlight reel. A year of lies. How many times had she smiled at me, kissed me, or laughed at my stupid jokes while knowing that her heart, and her body, belonged to someone else? When I got home, the house was dark. She was either out or pretending to sleep, and honestly, I didn't care. I walked straight past the bedroom without even looking inside, grabbed a blanket from the closet, and crashed on the couch. That night, I didn't sleep. Not really. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the email's words glowing in my mind like neon signs. I never wanted it to get this far, but here we are. I realized something in those quiet hours of the night. Jessica wasn't just done with our marriage. She had been done for a long time. She'd been checked out, playing house while living a whole other life behind my back. I had been a placeholder in her routine, the husband who didn't ask too many questions, didn't suspect a thing. That hurt more than the betrayal itself. I felt like I'd been sleepwalking through my own life. The next morning, I decided enough was enough. I couldn't live like this, wondering what was real, who she really was, and how long she'd been laughing behind my back. So I took the first step in what felt like a long overdue decision. I called a divorce lawyer. Walking into that office felt surreal, like I was about to officially declare war on everything I'd built over the past 7 years. The attorney, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, greeted me with a firm handshake. Her office was sleek, all glass and steel, with heavy books lining the shelves like they held the secrets to 100 other broken marriages. "So," she said, after we exchanged the usual pleasantries, "what brings you in today?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady as I laid it all out. The affair, the lies, the email. By the time I finished, she was nodding slowly, her pen scratching across a yellow legal pad. "Do you have any proof?" she asked, glancing up at me. I hesitated. Proof? The only thing I had was that damn email, and the memory of seeing her draped across our bed, FaceTiming her lover like I was a distant memory. I told her about the email. "That should help," she said, leaning back in her chair. "It might not be enough to turn the divorce into some kind of victory lap, but it will definitely put things in your favor, especially if we're talking about alimony or assets." I hadn't even thought that far ahead, about the money, the house, everything we'd accumulated together. It wasn't about that for me. It was about getting out, escaping from this nightmare that had swallowed up my life. She continued, her voice calm and professional. "You're making the right decision. Infidelity is one of the few clear-cut reasons for divorce that the courts actually care about. You'll have leverage, especially if she tries to make things messy." I nodded, though I felt like I was floating outside my own body. Divorce. The word felt heavy, like it didn't quite belong in my life. But here I was, sitting in a lawyer's office, planning how to dismantle my marriage piece by piece. It was surreal. As I left the lawyer's office, the sky was overcast, fitting for the mood that had settled over me. I wasn't angry anymore, at least not in the fiery, immediate way I had been. Now it felt more like exhaustion, a deep, bone-crushing fatigue. I was tired of thinking about her, about the lies, about what had been going on behind my back. I just wanted it to be over. I wanted to wake up one day and not feel like my entire life had been flipped upside down. But I knew the hardest part was still to come. I had to tell her. I had to be the one to look her in the eye and say the words, "I'm done." That night, I came home earlier than usual. I wanted to get this over with. When I walked in, Jessica was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. She looked up when I came in, her face neutral, like we weren't standing at the edge of the cliff. "Josh," she said, sounding almost casual. "We should talk." I stood there for a moment, looking at her, trying to remember the version of her I used to love, the version that didn't treat me like a spare tire. But that version was long gone. "Yeah," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "We should." She raised an eyebrow. "Okay. What's on your mind?" I walked over, sat down across from her at the table, and took a deep breath. "I want a divorce." Her eyes widened, and for a second, I thought I saw genuine surprise on her face, like she didn't see this coming. She set her phone down, slowly, as if she were processing what I just said. "A divorce?" she repeated, her voice flat, like she was testing out the word. "Yes," I said, meeting her gaze directly. "I'm done." "You're done. This is over, Jessica." She blinked, then tilted her head slightly, that smirk of hers threatening to return. "Is this because of that guy? I already told you it wasn't serious." I shook my head, feeling a strange calm wash over me. "It's not just about him. It's about everything. You've been lying to me for a year, Jess. You've been living a double life, and I can't be part of it anymore." Her expression shifted, a flicker of something close to annoyance crossing her face. "You're overreacting," she muttered, leaning back in her chair. "We've had rough patches before and we got through them. This is no different." "This is completely different," I said, my voice harder now. "You've been cheating on me, and you're still trying to twist this into something it's not. I can't do it anymore." She rolled her eyes, Letting out a long sigh like this was all a major inconvenience for her. Fine if that's what you want, but don't think this is going to be easy. You'll regret this. I stood up, looking down at her one last time. I already regret every second I wasted with you after you decided to cheat. And with that, I walked out of the room, knowing there was no turning back now. This was the end, and it was time to start over, without her. After dropping the bombshell of wanting a divorce, the house became a war zone. Jessica didn't take it well, not that I expected her to. I thought maybe, just maybe, there'd be some shred of remorse after I told her I was done. But I was wrong. What followed was a tidal wave of manipulative tactics, accusations, and emotional games. She wasn't going to let go quietly. A day after I told her, Jessica started pulling every trick in the book. First, she tried to play the victim card like she was the one who had been wronged. That morning, I came down for coffee, and there she was, sitting at the kitchen table with red, puffy eyes. I wasn't sure if it was real or staged, but at this point I didn't care anymore. "Josh," she said, her voice hoarse like she'd been crying all night. "I don't want to lose you. We can work through this. I know I messed up, but I'm willing to go to therapy, do whatever it takes. We can fix this." I stared at her, feeling that knot of frustration tighten in my chest. Therapy? Now? After a year of lies and betrayal? The time for therapy had passed the moment she started seeing that guy behind my back. "Jess, it's too late for that," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've been living a lie for a year. You didn't just make a mistake. You built a whole other life. I can't trust you anymore." She sniffled, wiping at her eyes. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was lost, okay? I made stupid choices, but it doesn't have to end like this. We've been through too much together to just throw it all away." Hearing her try to plead her case was almost painful. Maybe part of me had wanted her to beg, to show that she cared, but it all felt hollow now. Every word she said sounded like she was performing, trying to figure out what would get me to cave. I leaned against the counter, feeling drained. "It's already over. You've made your choices, and I've made mine." Her face hardened. The vulnerability she was putting on melted away in an instant, and her true self, the one who had lied to my face for months, came roaring back. "So that's it? You're just going to walk away? You think you're the saint in all of this?" She stood up from the table, her voice rising. "You weren't perfect either, Josh. You're always at work, never home, always too busy for me. What was I supposed to do? Sit around waiting for you to notice I exist?" There it was, her classic move. Turn the blame on me. I felt the anger rising again, but this time, I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of another argument. "You had a choice," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You could have talked to me. You could have said something, anything, if you were unhappy. But instead, you chose to cheat." She crossed her arms, glaring at me. "You're such a hypocrite. You're not innocent in this either." I shook my head, knowing this was going nowhere. "Believe whatever you want, Jessica. I'm not arguing with you anymore." I turned to leave, but her voice stopped me cold. "You're going to regret this," she spat, venom dripping from every word. "You think you can just walk out of this marriage like it's nothing? I'll make sure you pay for this. Don't think for a second I'm going to let you walk away with everything." Her threat hung in the air, but I wasn't scared. I knew she'd try to make the divorce as messy as possible, but honestly, I didn't care. I was ready for it. Whatever came next, I'd deal with it. I'd already lost the most important thing, trust in her. Everything else was just details. As the days passed, Jessica's behavior became more erratic. One minute she was sweet, trying to make me reconsider, making me dinner, acting like the perfect wife, even texting me during the day like she used to when things were good. The next minute, she'd be ice cold, snapping at me for the smallest things, threatening to drag me through a brutal divorce, and making sure I knew just how much she hated me for ruining her life. But I wasn't biting. I'd already made my decision, and I wasn't backing down. I started sleeping in the guest room, avoiding her as much as possible while we waited for the divorce process to officially begin. I even started spending more nights at Ryan's place again, just to escape the suffocating tension in the house. And then one night, when I thought things couldn't get any crazier, they did. I came home late after staying out with Ryan, trying to clear my head and avoid the minefield that was my home. When I walked in, I noticed something was off immediately. The house was too quiet, almost eerie. I headed upstairs, figuring Jessica was asleep, and that's when I saw it. The bedroom door was cracked open, and inside, Jessica was sitting on the bed, FaceTiming someone. Not just anyone, him. The same guy from the first time I caught her. The one she'd been seeing for a year behind my back. She hadn't even bothered to stop after everything. After all the lies, the arguments, the promises, here she was, still doing the same thing, sitting in the same spot she'd been in the first time I saw her with him. Couldn't believe it. My hands clenched into fists as I stood in the doorway, staring at her, not saying a word. She didn't even notice I was there at first, too wrapped up in her conversation. But then her eyes flicked up, and when she saw me standing there, she froze. The guy's voice was still coming through the phone. Some stupid joke he was telling that made her giggle, but now her smile dropped, replaced by panic. "Josh," she stammered, quickly lowering the phone. I wasn't. You never stopped, did you?" I said, my voice barely a whisper, filled with disbelief and disgust. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence was all I needed to hear. I turned around without another word, walked down the stairs, and out the door. This time, I wasn't coming back. Walking out of the house that night felt different. It wasn't just an escape from the suffocating tension or another attempt to clear my head. This time, it was final. There was nothing left to salvage, nothing left to talk about. I had caught her red-handed again, and the last shred of doubt I had about leaving her was gone. I drove around in silence for a while, my mind strangely calm despite everything. No more guessing, no more worrying about what she might be hiding. Now, I knew the truth in all its ugly detail, and it set me free in a way I hadn't expected. The weight that had been pressing down on me for months was suddenly lifted, replaced by a cold clarity. There was no more room for sadness, no more room for rage. Just the brutal reality. Jessica had never really cared. I'd been holding on to the idea of her, not the reality. I ended up at a hotel. Cheap, nothing fancy. It was late, and I wasn't in the mood for small talk with the front desk clerk, so I paid in cash and headed up to the room. When I finally lay down on the bed, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I already knew who it was, but for some reason, I picked it up. Sure enough, Jessica had sent a series of texts, her emotions swinging wildly from one extreme to the next. "Jessica, Josh, I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking. Can we just talk? You don't understand. I didn't mean for it to go this far. This is your fault too, you know. You're the one who pushed me away. Fine. If you want to walk away from this marriage, don't expect it to be easy. You'll regret it." I turned the phone over without replying and let it fall into the silence of the room. Let her rant. Let her spiral. I was done being pulled into her toxic web. The next morning, I met with my lawyer again. This time, I was ready to move forward full speed. The divorce paperwork had already been drafted, but now I was more than willing to push it through. I sat across from her in that sleek office, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like I was in control again. "We'll file by the end of the week," my lawyer said, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. "Given the infidelity, you're in a strong position. We can request a fair split of assets. The house will be a key point of negotiation, but I think we can make a strong case for you." I nodded, though my mind was more focused on getting out than on who would end up with the house. The house was just bricks and wood. It didn't mean anything to me anymore. It had become a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. I didn't want it. I just wanted peace. As we wrapped up the meeting, I felt a strange sense of finality creeping in. The end was close, and there was no turning back. A few days later, things took an even uglier turn. I was at work, trying to distract myself with the mountain of emails that had piled up, when my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text from Jessica, but a notification that stopped me cold. "Bank alert. $8,500 withdrawal." My heart started racing. I hadn't withdrawn anything close to that amount, and the timing was way too suspicious. I logged into my bank account, and there it was. Jessica had drained one of our joint accounts. I felt the familiar anger rising again, but this time it wasn't a slow burn. It was a full-on blaze. I called her immediately, my pulse pounding in my ears. She picked up on the second ring, her voice annoyingly calm. "What do you think you're doing?" I spat into the phone, barely able to contain myself. "What do you mean?" she replied, feigning innocence. "You took money out of our joint account. 8.5 grand, Jessica. You think I wouldn't notice?" "Oh, that," she said, her tone shifting to that smug, infuriatingly casual voice she always used when she was about to lie. "I needed it for some things. We're still married, Josh. That's still our money." My hand clenched around the phone, and I had to take a deep breath to stop myself from yelling in the middle of the office. "You can't just take money without talking to me first. That's not how this works anymore." She sighed, like I was being unreasonable. "It's just money. Don't be so dramatic. You'll get your half when the divorce is finalized." "I'm filing today," I said, my voice steady, but the threat clear. "And if you don't return that money by tomorrow, I'll make sure the courts hear about this." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her mind working, calculating her next move. "Fine," she finally said, her voice dripping with irritation. "I'll transfer it back. But don't think this means you're getting away with everything. I have my rights, too." I didn't respond. I just hung up, my hands shaking. She was pushing every button she could find, trying to make the process as painful as possible. But I wasn't going to break. Not now. Not after everything. True to her word, for once, Jessica transferred the money back the next day. But by then, I had already filed the divorce papers. There was no more playing nice, no more pretending like things could be civil between us. The gloves were off. A few days after the paperwork was submitted, she showed up at the house while I was packing the last of my things. I hadn't planned on being there when she came by, but she had a knack for showing up when I least wanted her around. She walked in like she still owned the place, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "So, this is it?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe, watching me pack. "You're really leaving?" I didn't even look up. "You made sure of that," she sighed, a fake, exaggerated sound. "It didn't have to be this way, Josh." I zipped up the last bag and turned to face her. "Yes, it did. You made your choices. Now I'm making mine." She rolled her eyes, pushing off the doorframe and stepping closer. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "You'll miss me." I shook my head, staring her down. "No, I won't." And for the first time in months, I knew it was true. There was nothing left to miss. As I walked out of the house for the last time, leaving her standing there alone, I felt a strange sense of freedom. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was the first step. The last chapter of my life with Jessica had closed, and I was ready to start a new one. One that didn't include her lies, her manipulation, or her betrayal. For the first time in a long time, I was free. I thought the hardest part was behind me after I left Jessica standing alone in that house, her threats and smugness fading into the background. The divorce was in motion. I was done with her games, and I'd finally reclaimed a piece of myself that had been buried under months of lies. I was ready to close that chapter for good. But then the email came. It was exactly a year after I filed for divorce, right when I was starting to feel like I was rebuilding my life. I'd moved into a new apartment, a place that didn't have her ghost lurking in every corner. I'd thrown myself into work, spent more time with friends, and even started dating casually. Just small steps back into the world without her shadow over me. I hadn't heard from Jessica in months. The last time we'd spoken was in the lawyer's office, finalizing the divorce. She'd signed the papers with that same detached expression she always wore, like none of this really mattered to her. I figured that was it. But then I saw her name pop up in my inbox. It was late at night when the email arrived, long after I should have been asleep. I was mindlessly scrolling through my phone when the notification buzzed. At first, I almost didn't open it. Part of me thought it was just another attempt at manipulation, something designed to pull me back into her toxic orbit. But curiosity got the best of me. The subject line made my heart skip a beat. "I should have told you the truth a year ago." My chest tightened as I clicked on the message. What could she possibly have to say after everything? What more was there to confess? But nothing could have prepared me for what I read next. "Josh, I know this is probably the last thing you want to hear from me, and you have every reason to hate me after everything that happened. I don't expect you to forgive me, but there's something I need to tell you. It's been weighing on me for the past year, and I can't keep it to myself any longer. I should have told you the truth a long time ago, but I was too much of a coward. I felt my pulse quicken, and a strange chill ran down my spine. I kept reading, my stomach sinking deeper with each word. When we started growing apart, I was already seeing someone else. You know that part, obviously. But what you don't know is that it wasn't just some fling. He was someone I had been seeing long before I even told you I was unhappy. Remember that trip I took to Chicago for a supposed work conference? That was a lie. I wasn't there for work. I was there with him. That's where it all started. We've been seeing each other since then. For over a year, I lied to you every single day. I stared at the screen, feeling the air leave my lungs. I'd known she was cheating, but hearing her lay it out so coldly, so methodically, made it feel like a fresh wound. A whole year. I'd been living in a fantasy while she'd been living a double life. But the worst part was still to come. There's something else I need to confess. Something I've been avoiding telling you because I didn't want to deal with the consequences. But you deserve to know the truth. I'm pregnant. And it's his. I blinked, my eyes frozen on the words. Pregnant. And it wasn't mine. Of course, it wasn't. I hadn't touched her in months before the divorce. She must have known for a while, maybe even when we were still married. And yet she said nothing. I imagined her going through our daily routine, smiling at me, knowing all along that she was carrying someone else's child. My hands shook as I continued reading. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to hurt you more than I already had. But now, I realized that keeping this from you was just another way I failed to take responsibility. You deserve to know the whole truth, even if it's coming a year too late. The rest of the email was full of the usual Jessica nonsense. Hollow apologies, excuses about how she didn't mean for it to happen this way, and how she hoped I could find it in myself to move on. She wrote as if this was just another minor detail in the wreckage of our marriage, something I could just shrug off and forget about. But I couldn't. Not this. The room felt too small, the air too thick. I stood up, pacing back and forth, trying to process what I just read. A year of betrayal wasn't enough. Now she was starting a family with the same man who had destroyed mine. And she hadn't even had the decency to tell me until it was too late for it to matter. She had walked away from our life without a second thought, already building a new one behind my back. It wasn't just cheating, it was erasing me entirely. For a few minutes, I just stood there, the email glowing on my phone, waiting for some kind of reaction to hit me. Anger? Sadness? Maybe both? But instead, all I felt was nothing. A deep, empty numbness. It was like the final blow had landed, and there was nothing left to feel. I wanted to throw my phone, scream, something, but what was the point? The damage had already been done, and nothing I did now would change it. Jessica had moved on, and now I had no choice but to move on too, for real this time. I closed the email, my hands still shaking slightly, and sat down on the edge of the bed. For a long time, I stared out the window at the city lights, trying to make sense of everything. But there was no sense to be made. This was the end of the road, the last chapter in a story that should have ended long ago. I didn't reply to her email. There was nothing left to say. I blocked her number and deleted her message, not because I wanted to forget, but because I needed to be done. Completely done. If there was one thing I'd learned from this whole nightmare, it was that sometimes you don't get closure. Sometimes the people who hurt you don't get what they deserve. And sometimes the only way to heal is to walk away, even when there are still 1,000 questions left unanswered. So that's what I did. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free.